What's interesting that's happening in the world of AI-based development is that I think neither actually the IDE nor the terminal actually makes sense as the sort of primary tool for the future of code. What makes the most sense is some sort of workbench where you as a developer just tell the computer what you want to do.
For example, I can say something in English and it could mean different things for the same exact, in different contexts. But code is already logical in the way it is out there. So if you're feeding a logical structure to the LLMs, it's more likely that it performs better on code than on English language. That was my thesis, why I was bullish on, like, we'll see a lot more coding related products.
Now my second company, and I can tell you kind of things that I learned from the first to the second, because the first one I basically failed out, but learned a lot. And really focus on team. So like really try to hire great people, even if it makes it go a little bit more slowly, and try to hold that high bar beginning. Really try to work on as big of a problem as you can, which I think is counterintuitive to a lot of startup founders. I think a lot of founders approach starting a company with like, find a niche, find a few initial customers, and that's cool. That can work to some extent, but sort of counterintuitively, like the bigger swing you're taking, the easier it is to get people to fund you, the easier it is to attract awesome people to work with you. People want to work on something really meaningful.
I think you use the term level of abstraction, which is my favorite term to use whenever talking about technologies. Is like, we used to write HTML code for websites, and then we've come up with WordPress, and then in WordPress, just for e-commerce, we went to Shopify. You don't have to use WordPress for e-commerce, you just use Shopify because everything e-commerce related will come with it. And then like we have Bubble and all these tools where the abstraction layer where we are working has completely changed, and maybe we can go to a layer where Amazon has figured out how to run a worldwide scalable e-commerce website, right? Why can't we just take the best practices of that and instantiate a new Amazon.com? Hello, everyone. My guest today is Zach Lloyd. Zach is the founder and CEO of Warp, a company that is developing an intelligent terminal aimed at modernizing the command line experience for developers, software engineers. They recently raised $50 million in Series B, led by Sequoia Capital, and participation from existing investors like Jeff Wiener, Mark Benioff, Dylan Field. He was previously principal engineer at Google, worked on Google Sheets and Google Docs Suite, co-founder and CTO of Selfmade, a venture-backed startup, and was also an interim CTO at Time Magazine. In this conversation, we'll talk about future of software development, evolution of the terminal, AI's role in building new products. If this is the first time you're listening to Startup Project, don't forget to subscribe to us wherever you're listening to the podcast. It helps us reach to a wider audience. Zach. Zach, welcome to the show.
I'm excited to be here.
So I was really excited to have you on the show because I think after the ChatGPT moment broke out, the LLM companies sort of were everywhere. I think that's sort of like the first line of value that is being captured. And then I was excited about the application, the new types of applications that we will see. And the most bullish use case for me was developer productivity. And the reason being, anyone who studied compilers will know that LLMs are actually looking a lot like compilers in terms of like text completion, autocomplete, in terms of what they generate. It looked a lot like compilers. And then there's this aspect of code is very deterministic. Like, for example, I can say something in English and it could mean different things for the same exact person in different contexts. Like the exact same phrase could mean a different thing, right? And it also depends on what emotion you're showing. But code is already logical in the way it is out there. So if you're feeding a logical structure to the LLMs, it's more likely that it performs better on code than on English language. That was my, thesis, why I was bullish on, like, we'll see a lot more coding related products. And I think in some format, we are seeing like the biggest use cases are around, developing new products and especially around software developers. So that's why I was really excited to have you and talk about Warp and what you're building there. So I think a good place to start is if you can talk about what is Warp, And how did you come up with this idea of intelligent terminal, and why it's important to build an intelligent terminal? I think that would be a good start and sort of level setting for the audience.
Cool. So yeah, Warp is, as you said, it's an intelligent terminal. The terminal, in case folks aren't familiar, is it's one of the two most important tools that developers use every day. They use a terminal, they use the code editor. The terminal is basically the place where you tell the computer what to do. And that could mean like building your code, it could mean running your tests, it could be writing internal tools, it could be interacting with your production system. So it's a very ubiquitous and important tool for developers, but it also is a tool that's kind of stuck in 40 years ago from a sort of usability perspective. It's something that really has not evolved much from an experience point of view. And when Warp started, our goal was like, let's modernize this interface. Let's make it more usable. Let's make it work more like a modern app. Even really simple things like let's make the mouse work in the terminal. But as the LLMs have matured and come out, the product has become vastly different. So at this point, Warp is just like a place for developers to talk to their computer and tell the computer what to do. And because they're doing this through the terminal, there's this huge array of tools that already exist in the form of these command line apps that can take what a developer says, like you said in English, and turn it into a series of app calls that do what the developer wants. And that could mean like setting up a new project or debugging something in production, or increasingly just writing code, which is obviously the biggest developer activity. And so that's where we're at today. We think Warp in the terminal is an amazing interface for a developer to tell AI what they want to do and essentially have it done to at least some extent.
So developers are really, like, every developer I know is like unique in some form. Like, everyone is picky about their stack of tools. They have their own slightly different version of terminals or command lines they use. So how does a developer use Warp now? They go to the terminal and install it, or how does the existing behavior of the terminal change by installing Warp?
Okay, great question. So if you're a developer, you can just go, you go to warp.dev, you download Warp. It's a native app. So if you're running on Mac or you're running on Linux, you're running on Windows, you just open it up and you use it instead of whatever terminal you were using. So if you were using like iTerm or the stock terminal app, the VS Code terminal, you just use Warp. And despite being a sort of AI native experience, Warp is backwards compatible with your existing like stack of things. So the way this works, really big picture, is a terminal is the app you run, and then within the terminal you run the shell. And the shell, think of it as like a text interpreter. So when you type a command, it's the shell that figures out what program to run. Warp works with all the existing shells, and those are things that are like Bash, Fish, CSH. And so a big product emphasis for us is like, let's meet developers where they are, not make them take a step backwards in order to, get all the extra benefit of being able to do all this incredible stuff with AI.
So basically, you allow developers to bring in their sort of existing nuances into Warp.
All basically works. So like for 98% of stuff that developers have set up in iTerm or wherever, you can just open up Warp, and it literally should just work the same, but also be better. At least that's our goal.
So terminal generally, is a little bit restrictive in terms of like, usually they're not intelligent in the sense that some terminals you can, easily go to the previous command and, reuse it. But you have to know the exact command. And this becomes really hard when a developer is in early stages of career, because you have to remember all those commands, or like you're constantly going to help, or, if you're using, GitHub or like Git and trying to commit or trying to do different things with Git, you're struggling with basically trying to find the right command to do the right thing, right? So with what intelligence is Warp adding to sort of like, if you can explain through in terms of like an example or a feature that you have?
Yeah, sure. So you're absolutely right. So one thing that's really, really frustrating for beginners and for experts is like, you open up the terminal, it's just a blank screen. And if you want to get something done, you better remember what the command is. And these commands can become quite complicated. So like, let's say, I don't know, let's say you want to set up a brand new Python project. If you want to do that, you have to install the Python toolchain and then you might have to like clone some Git repo. When you go to clone the Git repo, you might find that you don't have SSH keys. And then you're like, oh no, like you're going to start Googling, you're going to Stack Overflow. How do I recreate my SSH keys to authenticate to GitHub? And so that's annoying. That's like not what developers want to do. Developers want to build things. They don't want to deal with like all this incidental complexity that comes with like, fix my path variable to reference the current Python binary. And so what Warp does is you don't have to remember the commands at all. You just need to know what you want to accomplish, and you tell the computer to do it, literally in English. So you would, instead of typing a command in Warp, you would type, help me set up a new Python toolchain, clone this repo, make a new branch for me, make sure it all compiles and runs. And that's it. You would type enter. And then what the LLM does is it says, where am I? What am I trying to do? And it starts issuing commands to figure out its context. So the LLM might run like ls, it might run git status, it will try to run git clone. When it runs git clone and hits that SSH error, it'll say like, we had an SSH error. Do you want me to generate these SSH keys for you? And you as the user will say yes. And then it will remember what the command is to generate the SSH keys. And it will basically do this with you until you get to the spot that you want to be at. And that's a way, way better workflow than switching context out of the terminal and like looking this up on Google every time you hit some error. So it really saves a lot of time and like also a lot of frustration for developers who are doing this kind of thing.
So, the terminal, as you said, in its basic form hasn't changed much. But at the same time, I think there's also has been this huge integration between IDEs and terminals. Does that change how you think about Warp? Like, does Warp have to also now work on the IDE?
Okay, great question. So a lot of people use the terminal in the IDE, and like there's definite benefits to that. Like you have one app. What's interesting that's happening in the world of like AI-based development is that I think neither actually the IDE nor the terminal actually makes sense as the sort of primary tool for the future of code. What makes the most sense is some sort of workbench where you as a developer just tell the computer what you want to do. And so the standard workflow for someone using an IDE today is that you'll open up the IDE, let's say you're trying to build a feature. And so you'll open up, you'll find all the files that might be relevant to building that feature. And then you'll start writing a function. You'll start writing a class definition. Maybe if you're using something like Copilot or Cursor, you'll get a bunch of completions, and that will help you do it. But you're basically doing what I call coding by hand. So it's like a very much like the level of abstraction you're working at today as developers, like you hand build all this stuff. Or likewise, if you're using the terminal, what you're typically doing is you're running a bunch of commands and you're doing those things by hand. But the world that we're moving towards is something where rather than doing anything by hand as a developer, at least doing by hand from the outset, what you're going to do is you're going to work by prompt. And what that means is you're going to describe the feature that you want to build in English, and the AI with some level of autonomy, and I think increasing autonomy, is going to solicit whatever information it needs from you and from your environment, and then it's going to go do that task. And so I guess my hypothesis is that the IDE is not actually like the right place to do that. It's much more of a place for like having a bunch of files open and doing hand editing. And what you see in all of the sort of AI-based IDEs, like for instance, like Cursor, Windsurf, which are very popular, is that increasingly they are guiding users over to a sort of chat panel that sits on the right side of the IDE, where the user can, through conversation or prompting, build their feature. And that chat panel, interestingly enough, is like starting to look more and more kind of like a terminal in its interactions, where it's like you say something, something happens, you see previews of changes. And so Warp's approach to this is not to build an IDE, although we're trying to support coding use cases, but to build something where if you as a developer can like ask for anything you want done and build the interface around like showing the work that's being done directly in that kind of linear fashion where the computer is executing your prompt. So my vision here is like these traditional IDE terminal boundaries are going to kind of blend into something that is really oriented around like what the best workflow for development should be in the future.
I mean, historically, like if you look at development, like I think you use the term level of abstraction, which is my favorite term to use whenever talking about technologies, is like we used to write HTML code for websites, and then we've come up with WordPress, and then in WordPress, just for e-commerce, we went to Shopify. Now you don't have to use WordPress for e-commerce; you just use Shopify because everything e-commerce related will come with it. And similarly, like we've diverged into like Substack will give you a newsletter, right? So we've moved into that abstraction layer where we no longer use WordPress or HTML to write. The end output is sort of same, but what you're doing to get it actually changed. So like we have Bubble and all these tools where the abstraction layer where we are working has completely changed. And maybe we can go to a layer where, Amazon has figured out how to run a worldwide scalable e-commerce website, right? Why can't we just take the best practices of that and just instantiate a new Amazon.com, right? I think that's sort of like Shopify in some sense.
That's what's happening. I think another like analogy that is pretty good is, back in the day, developers used to work in assembler language, and that was really, really low level. Like you were controlling the operations, what's going in registers, and then you moved up to a language like C, which you still have to know how memory works. But it enabled fast productivity improvements. And then you moved up to a language like Python or JavaScript where, you're still coding, but you don't have to worry about so much of the underlying system architecture. And this in some ways is like I think it's a bigger step because you can basically do it through English, but you're totally lessening the barrier to working with, with code just by, moving up to like, you can just tell the computer what to do. Now, I do think that I don't know how long this will last, but I think for now and for the next like year, 2 years, maybe longer, you're going to need that programming expertise to build things that are of of any kind of high degree of complexity. It actually, in some weird way, becomes more important that you know what's going on, because what's going to happen a lot of times with this method of developing by prompt is that the AI will do sort of 80% of something, and then it will get to a point where it gets in a loop, it gets stuck, or might have bugs that it can't resolve. And if you don't know what's going on, you're gonna be stuck with it. But yeah, it's like the level of abstraction is definitely changing for developing software.
And so, I mean, we constantly see this AI hype going up and down. And one of the things I noticed is like, doesn't matter if we not like find the next age AI model, or, even if we don't make cutting edge improvements, like we have so much stuff that we've created till now, and we haven't really moved the needle in terms of like creating new types of applications. We've only like Copilot is only one form factor, but we haven't seen new form factors that much. Like everything is pretty much Copilot type form factor. So I'm really bullish on like seeing new form factors for like different use cases where you sort of build for how would like a Word document would, if you have to rethink completely writing with AI first, like how would that look? And I don't think we have seen that fully, play out. So I'm hopeful like Warp and Cursor are trying something in coding. I think coding might be the first place where we actually see that.
It's the first place where the LLMs have really strong prompt market, I think. To the point that you made at the top of the episode, it's these models understand code super well. They're trained on a ton of code. Code is like has like a real structure. And so it's first of all, it's super cool space to be working in because I do feel like the advances in how these LLMs help programmers, it's like this is the biggest place where it's helping people right now. Yeah.
So
Uh,
how has the feedback been from developers? And also like talk to me a little bit about how the adoption is coming from. Are like developers discovering it and using it in their company and forcing the engineering managers to buy your product, or like is it coming from top down? Hey, we want to make this organization more efficiency and adopting your product.
so we're mostly building for developers. So our go-to-market motion is bottoms up product-led growth. It's going really well from like user adoption standpoint. Like we're well into the multiple hundreds of thousands of developers actively using Warp, and that's growing really fast. Um, the the It's interesting like why people use it. So we have some people who are using it because they want a better terminal UX. Um, and we have some people using it because they're sort of AI early adopters. Um, the It does happen. So if we get enough penetration in the company, like our strategy is like get a lot of developers using it, spread it wide, get developers paying for it. And then when we have enough concentration in the company, we end up having conversations with engineering leaders. And we do have a bunch of enterprise contracts with pretty good companies. But the primary motion is product like growth bottoms up. And then what gets people to pay us, and the revenue is actually growing really well, which is cool, is getting developers to a sort of aha moment in the app where the AI did something that kind of like blew their mind. Like it often could be something as simple as like fixing all of their dependency issues in their project. Um, but there is I think a sort of overlooked challenge where it's like developers, in order to like get the most out of this new tool set, need to change their behavior. They need to like think to prompt the AI. And if you don't make that really easy, then they don't discover it. And so, yeah, a big part of like what's really helped us grow is sort of like inserting ourselves in developers' existing workflows in ways that's like really low friction, but surfaces the value of the AI, like, with them doing most no work.
What are the examples? Like which workflows have you inserted in your?
Yeah, so prime example is like you try to build your code, you get a compiler error, and Warp just like pops up a fix for the compiler error. And that's like, oh, as a developer, all I need to do is accept this fix. Whereas that's very different from being like, you run your code, you get a compiler error, and then you expect the developer to know to type in, hey, please fix my compiler error. And so it's the extent that we can hook into someone's workflow, guess what they're trying to do, and surface the AI as like the fix. It's like that's the best way to get aha. I think that's one of the reasons that the first sort of modality that has really caught on is like basically autocomplete, is that it's there. It's no work and it's really low cost if it's wrong. And so looking for those types of hooks to get developers to like, accept the output of the AI and then eventually train them to change the way they interact with it is huge.
Are you um I'm assuming you're not creating your own model and leveraging other LLM models. Um, which models today are doing the best job in terms of, for use cases for war?
So the best model for developers right now is Claude Sonnet. It's sort of debatable if it's 3.5 or 3.7. Like we offer both in Warp. 3.7 is our current default, but it has actually some problems where it is a little bit overeager in terms of how it gathers context. There's a bunch of stuff going around Twitter on this. Those are the state of the art. The other thing that we're doing on the model side that's really interesting is we're now offering for more complex tasks, users have the option to sort of do a two-step execution where first they use one of the reasoning models. And so that could be like O1 or O3 Mini or DeepSeek O1, like US hosted version of that. And that they use that to come up with a plan. and then we switched them to a more of a just like a standard LLMs actually have stupid plan. So for those, we're using, I think the primary one is OpenAI.
I mean, how do you think is this going to evolve in next, like, 2-3 years, like in terms of development? And there's also this sort of new phenomenon that we are happening is we are calling it as agents, but at the same time we are using these high reasoning models along with our traditional LLMs, and then there is this whole framework around something being an agent.
Yeah.
How is it, and how are you trying to use it in your own product? This whole this overlap of these three things.
Yeah. So the way that I look at this is there's three main modalities that are important for developers right now when it comes to using AI in daily work. So one is completions, and I mentioned that earlier. It's like if you're in there and you're doing coding by hand, completions is incredibly aid. The second thing is chat. In chat, I think think of it as just like you're pairing with an agent. You're going, you need to be there. It's an interactive mode where you ask something, you get an answer. The agent does one or two things on its own. The third thing is like a true agent with like real autonomy. I think this is coming. And in this world, you have to change the user experience to be based around higher latency interactions. And so, like, what does that mean? It means like, if as a developer, let's say I'm asking an agent to build a feature for me, I don't want to really necessarily sit there and watch it do it. Might ask it to do it. It might take 5 minutes to get a plan and gather context. It might take 10 minutes to actually like execute and test. And like, you're just not going to sit there and watch it. And so that points towards a different sort of interaction modality. And so, I think what you need for that is essentially some sort of like workflow management software. It's like, it's not totally new. It's kind of like GitHub Actions or something like that, where you started as a job. When it finishes, it tells you. If it hits an error, it tells you. You could have multiple of them running at once. You can sort of see the history of them. And so it's like, think of it as like a workflow automation system that developers need for agents. I think one other really important property of this system is that when the agent fails, and I think it's going to fail a lot at the beginning, or it's going to need more context, that it's not a pain in the ass for the developer to hop in and work with it to fix the issue in one of those two other modalities, chat or just like hand, code by hand. So I think like a great like fallback mechanism is another important aspect.
I mean, traditionally, like, when developers use terminals, there's always like 4 or 5 instances with each terminal doing different tasks, right? You're almost now like have to think about how do this new form factor do the same thing, but also in a user-friendly way. Or I don't know, maybe you go back to that.
No, that's right. That's why we're bullish on the terminal. This very old school UX actually being weirdly a great like UX foundation for a world where you're working with agents, because agents are just long running programs. Like they're long running programs that where the big difference between an agent and a regular computer program is that the agent can apply intelligence to a task and make decisions. But they're basically long running programs. And the terminal, like, again, going back to like what it was designed for, is something that runs long running tasks. It has all of this multitasking UX parameters built in. You can background a task. It has this interactive like REPL mode, which is essentially chat. And so, this is like our kind of crazy thesis is that this is actually an awesome interface for like managing developer agents. And so that's, we're psyched about where we are in the stack to try and, build this new form factor.
Oh, can you talk a little bit about cost? Because I haven't looked at the pricing that you're offering developers and enterprises, but there's obviously this whole debate about, LLMs are costly, like the per query is not still, cheap enough to make sustainable business. Like, how are you seeing that play out? Like, are you seeing a path towards creating a sustainable business model? And how are the margins going to look like?
It's a great question. So the way our pricing works, we have we have a couple plans for like individuals and small teams, and they're at like the $15 and the $40 price point. And the big difference is it's really around like AI requests, and it's it's a it's a hard thing to price. I will say that because the underlying price of these models is actually all based on like tokens and models. But I feel like tokens is like a little too close to the metal to price these things, and a little too far from the value to a developer. Like the ideal pricing would be like something that's very value aligned, but the types of things developers do makes that hard to do. So we price it in terms of requests. For all of our paid users, we have like a pretty healthy positive margin, like I don't know, 30 to 60%, something like that. Like, however, it's really hard to do this because the underlying models end up changing both their cost, and they also change like how much context they want to gather. So for instance, when we put out 3.7 support, our costs went way up because it's a very like context hungry model. And so, it's like a kind of game where we're trying to guess at how these models are going to evolve. We're trying to also offer the best user experience. We also give all of our free users some amount of AI because we want them to understand the value, and so get them to like, a moment where they want to pay us. And so, the costs are like, I definitely think there's like a path to a sustainable business here. I don't know exactly what's going to happen with model costs. Like on the one hand, it seems like there's like some amount of commoditization, which should bring costs down and be helpful at the app layer. On the other end, it's like there's still we want to be offering these cutting edge models that are very sort of costly to operate, like the reasoning models and so on. So it's a bit of an open question, but we're able to grow in a way which is not like we're not like incinerating cash as we scale our user base, which is important.
And I think there is one path I always thought that this dependency on LLMs could change completely when you adopt to an open source model and host it in your own cloud, and then sort of start to fine tune your own models. I think would that sort of create a completely new profit
Totally different
model, right?
Yeah. So if we were to take like, DeepSeek or Llama or something and host it, it's like a totally different level of control over the costs. All of a sudden, it's like you're not paying a model provider. Like I think if you look at like the sort of who's making money on AI, it's the chip makers. Like I think there's like a big margin on the NVIDIA product. Then it's like the hyperscalers. So I think like, AWS, Azure, G-Cloud, the model providers. So there's a lot of people taking margin before you get to the app layer. So if it's like you can move away from the model provider and run your own model, I think you can definitely get some of that margin back. We don't do that right now because the quality difference of the models is such that we think it makes more sense to, expose try to get like basically our number one concern is like, can we get users to realize the power of this stuff and convert into wanting to pay us? And then like from a unit economics standpoint, it's like we're kind of like, let's just stay break even at least, and then wait and see in terms of like what's the right way to optimize the cost. But it's I don't know, I think about this all the time. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like if I'm using Uber, I don't care if it's on AWS or GCP or Azure, right? Like as long as I establish myself as this service provider, then
Totally.
I am good. Then I can increase the margin over time by doing other things.
Exactly. So we want to have the relationship with the developer. And we actually we let developers choose the model. But what we're moving towards is a world where we sort of automatically try and do it to give them the best experience, just because like it feels like a weird implementation detail. And it feels like at the end of the day, as a developer, unless I'm like someone who's like testing LLMs for my job, it feels like what I should actually care about is like, what's the quality of interaction? And so, we want to abstract that and just make the experience awesome using whatever the best, most cost-effective LLM is.
is there any metric that you really focus on for your product? Like, for example, one of the things I'm interested in AI product is how much time does it take for a newly signed up customer to get me to pay for it? Like that's a very interesting number that I try to find out for new products, is because AI products are particularly compelling, and if you hit a use case, it will take you 5 minutes to get them to pay. And I've seen customers pay a lot faster than a SaaS product or any other product. So I'm curious, like, do you have any special metrics or like special time or dimensions that you're looking at which tells you a good feedback whether your product or a feature is working?
Yeah. So one really interesting metric that we've just started looking at is like what percentage of things done are either done by AI or being asked of AI. And like a normal terminal, it's 0%, right? Normal terminals, you can't interact with them with AI. For Warp, we're at like, I don't know, 10%-ish of things that are happening in the terminal right now are either the user asking in English or the AI doing something. AI engagement is the leading indicator for monetization for us. And so I think it would be a really cool spot for us to get to something where it's like more than half of the interactions happening in Warp are happening in English or happening autonomously because of the AI. And so like that's like one of these metrics I think is like a super interesting leading indicator for us. Just like because we're trying to basically flip our users' perception of this being a terminal that has AI to a AI interface where you can fall back to using the terminal if you want.
It's that phrase that you mentioned last time we were talking about, as code by hand to
Yeah,
code by prompt.
exactly.
Can you talk a little bit about your go-to-market motion and like how you're approaching acquiring customers? Because I think developer products have a really tough time, because I think marketing for developers is a particularly interesting problem versus marketing to a general audience. So I'm trying to understand, like, how are you approaching acquiring developers? And what are the things you're doing? Are you spending money on it, or what are the approach you're taking here?
Yeah, so it's like 80% of it is organic. We spend some money on just like we do various sort of sponsorships of GitHub repos. We do a little bit of Google ads, but the primary thing is organic. The biggest driver by far is developers telling each other about it. We've experimented with doing some stuff that is a little bit more around like viral loops. So we have like a referral program. We also have the ability, if you do something cool in Warp, to share it. So you can share that like by link. So it's like you can share the terminal output, you can share prompts, you can share notebooks. And so we have a sort of inbuilt, it's a collaboration platform. It works for teams, but it also works for external sharing, which is a cool driver of top of funnel. And then a really big thing is social. So in social, it could be our own social channels, or more commonly, the best thing for us, probably the best thing for most developer companies, is someone doing something super cool with your product and showing it to the world. And it's better if it's not you, actually. So it could be influencers, it could be like on Twitter, it could be someone on YouTube. And like for a product like Warp, it's like to get it, you have to see it, which is it's a little bit hard to do on podcasts, but it's like, if we were doing this some other way, I was just like, I would, show you, I would have an app being built in the background or something. And it's like when a influential person does something really cool with the app on Twitter or YouTube, that's been by far like the biggest like sort of spikes that we've had.
So I want to ask, like, recently, one of my favorite questions to ask all the founders is, how are you using AI, and did it change, the way you are building your own startup for your own productivity or for your team's productivity? Because we have seen this, notion of like, we're reducing jobs because of AI. I have slightly different opinion on whether if it's because of AI or for other reasons, but I'm curious about this question of how much did the process of building a company and teams has changed because of AI, like post AI world, because you've done a company before. So just on a comparison level, like how much did the economics change? Did the team building change? Did the pace change? What changed?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So, I mean, we're building an AI product and we're all developers and we all use our own product every day. And our own product does actually help us. There is like a virtuous cycle of like, as the AI gets better and more, we do more and more of our coding, debugging, DevOps tasks just by talking to our own product, which is like highly recommended if you're founding something to be able to have this like dog food cycle where you get value directly out of the thing that you're building. I would say outside of our own product, I mean, there's a few AI tools that I use, but honestly, like my life has my life hasn't changed that much. Like, I don't know, I'll give you an example. I use a tool that I really like called Granola, which is a like an AI meeting note taker, and I just don't take notes in meetings anymore. Um, that's cool, but it's not like some of the stories that you hear. I saw a tweet from President YC. And it was like in the latest YC cohort for 25% of the companies, 95% of the code was written by LLMs. That's not like that feels like very, very transformative and different. That's not how it's been with Warp. But we're adopting AI tools, and the primary that we adopt is the one that we're building.
Do you think we have hit a productivity level where we need less developers versus more developers?
Not at all. Like, we're trying as hard as we can to hire developers. I think to add some nuance to that, I think there's probably a class of apps that are like, kind of relatively simple front end apps where you can maybe start if you're a company to not hire developers. If you have developers who are doing like web-based prototyping, I feel like that's almost a solved problem with things like Bolt and V0. But for the type of development that I do, and I think it's probably still economically the most important development, which is like professional software development at like either a tech company or a company that really has like a significant technology component. The impact to me of these AI tools is that it makes your existing developers more productive. And the other thing I would say is like, I think there's basically infinite demand for software. Um, so I don't know, it's not like the AI is pulling a huge slice from a fixed pie. It's more like, developing software is becoming more efficient and there's benefits to having more efficient software come into the world. And so I think it's like every company I know is trying as hard as they can to hire awesome software developers right now. And so I haven't seen an impact, like a negative impact at all in the type of development we do. I'm curious your insights actually.
I actually think AI is at a stage where it is sort of like draft AI, I call it, because it gets you to the 80 to 90%. It doesn't get you the 100%. And that's where really the narrative versus reality is that, okay, you can quickly get to, in some cases, 60%, in some cases, 80%. I think the 80, 90% is more marketing related use cases. Coding related, I would say maybe 70%. I still like, whenever I'm writing queries to get data out, because I do a lot of data analytics, it's always that it is misinterpreting something that I've said, or it's still not getting to the place I want. I still have to write a couple of lines here and there or to adjust it. So that is still, you still need a developer to do that. It's not like a layman can do it and identify the bug and, go that 15, 20%. I think that's why I think we're at a stage where it's all draft AI. So yes. Any place where that main job is to create drafts. So let's say it is PR, let's say it's marketing, let's say, communications. I think that's where I think you have a lot more productivity gain from AI because, the thing that would have taken you 5 hours, you can do it in 20, 30 minutes. Like you have the writer's block before. I don't think you have a writer's block now because you can just throw it at at some copilot and say, hey, give me a different version or, try this style, try that style. And then you're automatically kicking into some sort of creative zone. So writer's block is, I think, eliminated because of that. So I
agree with this.
I think in some sense, it feels like coding is the first line of attack from the narrative. But I think it is still the last line of attack when you actually go into the reality. And even if you look at a professional who's working at a company where how many tools he has to deal with when you're actually get to the end product, it's not one tool, right? It is not still one IDE to actually develop. There are multiple projects, multiple different types of, languages that you need to bring together. There are multiple orchestrators in the middle. There's a lot that takes from going from like pre-prod to production, right? There's so many steps that involve, and over time, I think it takes a lot more innovation on a product level, abstraction level, like we talked about, to actually get there where we see meaningful productivity, at least on the developer side.
I agree. And like, I think it's a mistake to think of it only as a function of the progress in the models. Like the models can progress, but the models are only as good as the context that's provided. And so just getting all the right context and knowledge into these things is a challenge. And then the other thing is like the likelihood of succeeding at a task at some level depends on whomever is starting the task, their ability to specify it correctly. And like to your original points, like English is ambiguous. And like when people speak, they assume a lot of context that the LLM does not know. And so, even with kind of like a almost like perfectly reasoning model, it's, the fallibility of humans and how they communicate, I think is still going to create work around this. At least that's my hypothesis.
We're almost at the end of our conversation. I want to ask a quick one-liners that I ask all my guests at the end of the show. What are you consuming right now? Like it can be books, podcasts, Netflix, that you're interested or curious about. Like what are you consuming?
I'm reading a totally different non-tech book called Traveler's Guide to the Middle Ages, which is it's sort of like like photos or whatever. It's like imagine you were traveling in the Middle Ages. What would that experience be like? Where would you go? And it's about a lot of people who are essentially going on religious pilgrimages or traveling to the Far East. And I like it because it is a interesting reminder to me of how different like an individual's experience of the world was not that long ago. And I like that it's history, but it's not history based on major historical events. It's all about like how did people live during a certain time period. So I don't know if it's for everyone, but it's kind of a cool book, so I'm enjoying it right now.
Yeah, sounds fascinating. Are there any mentors in your career that helped you in your career?
We've got ton of mentors. I guess I'll call out this guy who he's kind of legendary in the tech industry. He's now the CTO of Notion. His name is Fuzzy. He was my manager when I was at Google on Google Talks. He was one of the creators of Google Sheets. And I don't know. I would say I'm not. He's a way better engineering manager than I am. But most of what I learned about like how to sort of like create incentives for engineers, give feedback to engineers, how to get a team functioning at a high level, I learned from him. So he's an awesome guy.
What did you know about starting a company right now that you wish you knew before?
So I'm now in my second company, and I can tell you kind of things that I learned from the first to the second. Because the first one I basically failed out, but learned a lot. And really focus on team. So like really, really, really try to hire great people, even if it makes it go a little bit more slowly, and try to hold that high bar beginning. Really try to work on as big of a problem as you can, which I think is counterintuitive to a lot of founders. Like I think a lot of founders approach starting a company with like find a niche, find a few initial customers, and that's cool. That can work to some extent, but sort of counterintuitively, like the bigger swing you're taking, the easier it is to get people to fund you, the easier it is to attract awesome people to work with you. People want to work on something really meaningful. So those are two things from the first company to the second that I think are important lessons.
I think the third one really, resonates with me because technically, if you aim higher, the competition is lower.
Yes. Yeah, and like,
Uh,
look, we did something at work that is probably totally advised against, which is like we had to build for a really long time before we had a really good product. Like we built our product in Rust rather than building it in web technology. We really tried to get the foundation of it to be awesome, and like that could be sort of a death sentence for a lot of startups. But I was like, I don't know, we're trying to build like something that's gonna have a lot of lasting value, taking a really long term outlook on it. I think is like it works. Yeah, I think it's working for us. I don't know if it works for everyone, but I it's very different than how I first thought about starting a company.
I think that's a good note to end the conversation. Zach, thanks for coming on the show and sharing all about Warp. I'm really excited about the space, and I'll keep an eye out on what amazing things you guys come up with.
Cool. Thank you so much for having me.